Let's talk some chess. We finally reached the decisive day, the FIDE World Cup of Chess. The final match is Magnus versus Pragg. Pragg is a very talented up-and-coming GM who has defeated Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana in this very tournament, so a player with a very bright future. Magnus, to his credit, has never actually won this tournament. It's the one major tournament that has eluded his grasp, so he'd very much like a victory today to add to his trophy case. The last time this tournament ran in 2021, 2 years ago, Magnus was the runner-up, so has never won that coveted victory. In the first two games of this match, the two classical games, both games were a draw. So now we're to the next round where both players have 25 minutes on the clock. Both players get a chance with white pieces, and then if it's still tied after the two games, the time will be reduced until we eventually get a winner. So that's the stage. The stakes are set. They're very high, and Pragg opens this up with e4. We have e5 by Magnus, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, knight to f6, d3, bishop to c5, and a4, grabbing some space on the queen side. d6 by Magnus, opening up a lane for his light-squared bishop. Kingside castle for Pragg, a5, cutting off the approach of that a4 pawn. Bishop to e3, and we have a nice bishop trade on e3. So Pragg has doubled up his pawns on the e-file, but he does have a nice semi-open file for his rook on f1. Kingside castle for Magnus, knight b to d2, knight to e7, knight to h4, c6, and queen to e1, preparing to get these two pieces on the king side and get an attack started against Magnus's king. We have d5 by Magnus, cutting off the light-squared bishop, bishop back to b3, queen to d6, queen to g3, lining up with the enemy king, and knight to h5, attacking the queen on g3. So queen to g5, and now g6, cutting the queen off from the g7 square, and now knight to f5 by Pragg. The engine prefers you to move the knight to f3 and keep it safe here, keep the pressure on the king side. But okay, Pragg, this is a very reasonable looking move, knight to f5, making use of the pinned pawn on g6. Of course, the queen is pinning the pawn to the king. But now Magnus can capture with the bishop, so bishop takes on f5, pawn takes on f5, fixing Pragg's doubled pawns on the e-file, king to g7, king to h1, queen to f6, offering up a queen trade, and Pragg accepts. Queen takes on f6, knight takes on f6, f takes on g6, h takes on g6, and now e4. And you can sort of see why the engine didn't really like giving that knight away. There's much less pressure on the king side now. A lot of pieces are off the board, and Magnus's position is much safer. So d takes on e4, d takes on e4. Not like there was a decisive attack anyways, but that's sort of the idea. Rook a to d8, attacking the knight on d2. So Magnus defends it. Pragg defends it with rook to f2. I don't have the two players. Like where I'm recording, I can't see the two players on the side, so I have to remember who's on which side. So I apologize if I say that wrong sometimes. Rook lift to d4 by Magnus, attacking these two pawns, which are defended, but a nice rook lift nonetheless. Rook a to f1, doubling up on the f-file. Knight e to g8, c3, and the next couple of moves, it's going to be just... We're in the end game, and obviously Magnus likes to grind these end games out and sort of look for a very small advantage and press that advantage. I should also mention that Pragg is starting to run low on time on this point. Magnus has plenty more time on the clock. Each player only had 25 minutes, so time is certainly a factor, so keep that in mind over the next series of moves. Rook to d7 by Magnus. We have rook to e2, rook to e7, bishop to c2, knight to d7, knight to c4, rook to a8, g4, expanding on the king side, f6, rook to g2, knight to h6, g5, f takes on g5, rook takes on g5, knight to f7, attacking the rook back to g2, rook to e6, rook to d2, getting on the open d file, rook to f6, challenging and offering a trade of rooks, and Pragg takes it, rook takes on f6, knight takes on f6, b4, a takes on b4, c takes on b4, king to f8 by Magnus, getting the king to the center of the board, king to g2 by Pragg, improving the position of the king to e7, a5, rook to h8, and rook to e2. And this is sort of the not the best move for Pragg because it allows knight to h5, which now threatens knight to f4, forking the rook and the king. So obviously here you have to deal with this. Pragg just plays king to g1, but now... basically Magnus is able to get his knight to f4 for free, and the knight attacks the rook, so the rook here has to be moved to d2. But now rook to h3 by Magnus, and you can sort of feel the pressure starting to build. The rook on the third rank, this very strong knight on f4, and Pragg at this point is also very low on time, so this sort of informs his next move. The best move here is just to play bishop to d1, a waiting move, keep playing very solidly, don't give anything up. But Pragg I think has like super low time on the clock, as we've seen. He's had some at some points in this tournament, and so he has to go for it, and he has to go for a breakthrough and hope for some counterplay, and he plays a6. hoping to create some magic on the queen side. But Magnus just captures, b takes on a6, and now bishop to a4 by Pragg, attacking this pawn on c6 and hoping to win the pawn back. But here Magnus just plays rook to c3, and this obviously attacks the knight on c4. This cannot be ignored. So Pragg plays knight to a5, now doubling up on this pawn on c6. A bit better move here is defending with the rook on c2. The bishop's protecting the rook, which is now also guarding the knight. This is still fine for Magnus. He has rook to f3. Now after h4, rook to g3 with check. The king can move to f2, but now rook to h3, knight to b6, knight to d6, king back to g1, and now knight takes on e4. And we're going through that quickly because it's not as important as the main line, but you can sort of see how still Magnus would win another pawn and get the knights and the rooks and the rook in a very threatening position. So, like I said, a bit better to defend with the rook here, but Pragg plays reasonable move, doubling up on this pawn on c6. But Magnus ignores the pawn and plays knight to g5. And the idea here is that previously this knight on f7 was defending the pawn on e5 because Pragg's knight was attacking it, but now that the knight moves away, Magnus's knight is free to move up the board and join in on the attack. So now we have rook to c2 by Pragg, offering up a trade of rooks because the bishop is guarding the rook, but Magnus does not want to trade and just plays knight g to h3, checking the king, and all of a sudden this king is running out of squares. The knight is checking it, the other knight is guarding g2, and the original knight is guarding f2, so the king can only move to h1 or f1. F1 is, of course, better, but now Magnus finishes the game in very stylish fashion. See if you can find his winning move while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, so the king is in trouble here. The knights are taking away the 3 squares in front of the king, which is never good if the king is on the back rank, and Magnus takes advantage of that with rook to a3. And the first thing you see with rook to a3 is you're attacking the bishop, and the bishop doesn't have many squares to go to. Obviously, if it goes to b5, then pawn just takes. If the bishop goes to b3, then rook, well, I guess rook can't take. So never mind. It looks like the bishop can go to b3. Even better, it looks like the bishop can take on c6. But the problem is that the real threat is rook to a1 check by Magnus, and this is going to lead to checkmate in just 2 moves. The king has nowhere to go because the knights are taking away these 3 squares, as mentioned. So after you block with the rook on c1, rook takes, and that's checkmate. So unfortunately, you can't deal with both the threats of checkmate on a1 and save the bishop on a4. Here Pragg threw in an intermezzo, knight takes on c6 with check, but after Magnus played king to f6, Pragg resigned the game because the best you can do here is rook to d2, preventing checkmate now, because if you play rook to a1, then the rook can just block on d1, protected by the bishop. But of course, you wouldn't play rook to a1. Instead, you would just pick up the bishop on a4 and be up a piece and win the game. So that was it. That was the game. After the king moved to f6, Pragg resigned the game. Just goes to show that Magnus can just play perfectly, and then if he sees you're low on time, he'll just wait for you to really go for it and then punish you very quickly. Get these 2 knights in position with the rook, cast a mating net while also threatening to pick up this bishop, and just a really nice finishing picture. So that's game 1. Pragg now has a chance to win the second game. If he wins, then we go on to the next round. If it's a draw or Magnus wins, then Magnus has won the World Cup. So I'll review that game in the next video. Thanks for watching. Drop a like and subscribe. And yeah, we'll see you in the next video. So see you soon.